I've been collaborating with the programs at Lines for about 10 years now. It's been a real gift to be involved in all of the programs from the dance center to the training program to the BFA program. And I've made a lot of works on the school and also done workshops and professional development, mentoring, and had relationships continue beyond. I've had a few dancers come out of the programs and dance for me and my company. So it's just a real gift to be back. As we go further away from childhood developmentally, things shift and change, and our awareness of time becomes more structured, and it sort of feels like time becomes constricted. If I can create that endlessness in my practice through improvisation, then I'm connecting with the purest element of myself and my dance. And in durational improvisation, you can create a kind of loop endlessness and constant reframing of the room or the idea, a kind of laboratory of exchange. And I think that for me, as I continue to learn it, because improvisation is not something you ever really learn totally. It's something that you're inside of, and it's really life. We're always responding to change and shift. But it connecting with my practice helps me navigate the creative process, helps me navigate the changing world in the most elemental way, just really looking at the thing and reacting and responding to it as it is. And I think that's something that, artists and people in theater, we feel that inherently. But I think sometimes we lose the play, and the willingness to fail. And that has been essential in my sustaining practice and career, is to have that notion that I can still fail and that it's okay. The dancers I'm working with right now in the BFA program will tell you that I've given them a lot of agency in this work. And, it's ultimately trust, but also the idea that we're all on the ride together. We're creating something together. So that allows for a kind of trust to be in the space that creates some ease, even when we're kind of hitting a nerve or touching a space that feels unfamiliar. We can use each other as community to navigate those worlds. And again, back to circular learning, that it's not just one directional, it's everyone in the room that's participating. When you first enter most formal spaces, there's a bit of a sort of veil of respect, which is lovely. There's a lot of respect, whoever, and I would be the same way, when someone that I am being taught by or mentored by, I still have that feeling too. Like I sort of get very still in my body. And but I think that, the body kind of releases, and you can see just the breath, the space exhales. They're busier too. They start to bounce around with each other in the room and kind of work on things, workshopping, without me having to prompt and say, let's kind of look at this for a little bit. So they start to rely on each other physically as well. And they just become like busy bees in the space. And I do too. At first I'm doing a lot of like the generative work of making the material, and the second half of the process, I'm doing a lot of musical research and looking at things from a sort of more structural overview point of view, but very busy in that. Like sometimes I'll be listening to music as they're working, or I'll be taking video actually, or photos, and looking at it through the lens of my camera, or I'm in discussion somehow, or like sort of writing ideas down for a potential costume or design idea, depending on the scope of the work. Or journaling, I do a lot of work through the written word, ideas that spring up. I'll be either writing them on my computer or on my in my journal. So yeah, we all just become busier and like kind of immersed in it. And it, you know, within that, there's a lot of space too for reflection. I often encourage the artists to write, you know, as we're going along, and to also doing that process of archiving what's happening in the space or ideas that are being picked at in language. And yeah, it feels much more like a laboratory or a devised space when everyone's more relaxed, that you know, we all become more verbal, either physically verbal or actually verbal, in offering ideas to each other. I think a lot of my work is informed by a kind of loneliness that's not sad, but there's a lot of like space for me to think and to reflect without other people, or, you know, and sometimes I'll be working on something also remotely. You know, I'll have this really major idea that occurs to me when I'm driving or walking, and then I'll, you know, kind of be communicating that remotely to someone else. Even, you know, pre-pandemic, I was, you know, working a lot with international collaborators and having to get ideas across across, and you know, just thinking and brainstorming and, you know, creating mood boards and writing, and sometimes just thinking with a cup of tea, you know, and sitting. But yeah, the sense of being alone, I think, is primary in my work, and it definitely comes out as a quantity. And, you know, there's moments of absolute vacancy. I think even in the movement, you know, has this sort of like bareness to it, porousness to it. I mean, Marina and Kara are two really strong examples of female leadership that, you know, pretty early on, because I've been working with lines for a while now, you know, believed in me and kind of took a risk on me, you know. And I love coming out to San Francisco because I get to see my friends, you know, that are my bosses too, you know. And I still have that feeling of like regard and respect, and like that it's a very special opportunity that they have given me over the years. And they're, you know, both very kind. But that's an important part of developing a space, as a kind of kind and civil and respectful atmosphere, so that people feel like they have permission to just be themselves. I think that that's the main thing. Is I'm not asking for anyone to be anything but themselves in the space, and I hope that they reciprocate that and allow me to be myself, and, you know, not only risk take but dream, allow the space to be dreamy, allow challenge to come in. So I feel like the leadership that I've been exposed to, and organizations that I have long-term relationships allow for that. Another woman that I cite, Denise Jefferson, who has passed away. She was my director when I trained at the Ailey School, and I was very young, like 14 to 17, but I think that was formative. You know, just she was very strong. She created all these like new educational initiatives. The Ailey Fordham program was her brainchild, and that was kind of happening while we were at the school, my class. And yeah, just I think without knowing it, that was very important. I think about that a lot, like how meaningful her leadership was, and she was very emphatic about rigor, but also nurturing. And I have a number of teachers at the Ailey School that were also really formative. Going to the Dance Theater of Harlem as a young Black dancer was also formative, because that possibility was a possibility. You know, it was founded. It was a Black organization. You know, all of the company members were in the building, and we got to see that. And so I think the setup of my training, my mom, you know, knew of these schools, and, you know, she put me in really important institutions that had legacy in a larger scope in the civil rights movement. And, you know, we're still working on these things, obviously, and things aren't perfect, but my early examples were perfect for me. It was a perfect place to start, because then I knew that there was a possibility for me. And I hope that I can do the same, for the next generation, that anything that I've, forged, that opens more space up. And I still have a lot of mentors too that I call on. I still am a student. Exploring meaning, I think is very important in studying performance. Not that everything has to take on meaning, but everything has a kind of meaning. We can make meaning out of everything, and that's what our brains do. And so rather than framing it as like or dislike, we can frame it in the making of meaning, and how we structure that in relationship to the things we know and the things we don't know. So I think it's just a healthy exercise to take on the responsibility of crafting meaning and subject in what we're seeing, so that we can allow for that to be in context to what we know, and also to what we don't know and what we need to explore further, potentially. We have that choice to know more. So I think, from my perspective, it's a bit of a responsibility as artists to do that, and to put ourselves in the context of what's happening. But, especially coming up, and continuing to just see things, to see a lot of work, and to create frameworks of understanding, and knowing that we won't understand everything, but that's okay. Looking into the seams, I think that was always taught, but I think you just continue to learn that more and more. It's like any process of deepening knowledge. Getting that knowledge early was just like the rigor of like doing and repetition and understanding and soaking and immersing. But just, looking in a more infinite way at possibility, that there's not one way. There really is no one way or blueprint of doing anything. There's only you, and there's only the way that you react and respond. And I think that helps me navigate my individualism. Is that as much as I try, I can't run away from who I am. And that helps me just like live in a more sort of easy relationship to self. Like, I don't have to put more on. It just, this is what it is, this is me. And this is the way that I perceive that. Not that it's right, it's just we all have our individual ways of walking on the earth, and that's okay. The goal is to understand more, and to learn more, and to look, closer and closer, which is looking into the seams. I think for me, is just looking more closer into, I guess, the narrow again, to see what opportunities can exist. It's just, you never know. There's so much more than meets the eye.